Well, hello there, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. The topic of today is really around understanding the reasonable and necessary criteria that the NDIS uses to justify which supports are going to be given to participants. It's a really important kind of framework for us to be able to understand as exercise physiologists, particularly when we are writing our reports, because our reports are different. We know that our reports should be different from the way that we do our GP reports, our workers' comp reports, our DVA reports. NDIS reports need to be different. And how that they're different is by understanding the reasonable and necessary criteria that our planners are using to justify the supports that are being given to participants. These are the things that we are speaking to. And these are the things that really need to kind of hold true in the reports that we are doing. So for those that don't know me, my name is Andrew. I do a few different things. I run an allied health business based on Sydney's Northern Beaches. I am a business consultant with a group called Clinic Mastery, who help allied health business owners across Australia to grow their clinics. And I am also the co-director of Rebound Academy, which is an education and training platform for exercise physiologists working within the NDIS to be able to help other business owners and other practitioners to grow their clinics and help more people by providing great services to their communities. So this is, I touched on this before, that this is the real reason for jumping on today. It is understanding the reasonable and necessary criteria and understanding how this relates to exercise physiology. So we, as a business, Rebound Health has been working in this space for quite a few years now. And within that, we kind of get feedback from our clients, we get feedback from our kind of trusted network of support coordinators. As a business consultant, I get feedback from other allied health business owners in this space. And these are the kind of main challenges that we see as exercise physiologists working in this space. Now, there's probably others, but these are the ones that kind of come through most commonly. The first one is that it's just our job to write programs, right? So somebody gets referred to us, participant gets referred to us, and it's really our job to just write a program that can be delivered by anyone. And that kind of really devalues the impact and the significance that an exercise physiologist places in the NDIS. So that we just write the programs, somebody else delivers them. Second thing is that we're essentially like a glorified personal trainer. That our therapy is seen as somewhat undervalued in comparison to what potentially a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist would be delivered, because there's kind of this comparison with what a personal trainer is doing. Now, again, that's not to devalue the role that a personal trainer plays, but the point is to understand that we are different, we do different things, and we should not be seen as just a personal trainer for somebody with a disability. And the third major kind of challenge that we see is that because we are a glorified personal trainer, because we just write programs, that is our value, and that those programs can then go and be delivered by a support worker or by an informal support of that participant. And again, like that, I'm going to debunk these things as we go through today, because it's important to understand that this is not the value that we have in this space. This is not the justification for exercise physiology being included in the NDIS at all. That in fact, we offer a very different and much more comprehensive support to people on the NDIS. So what is reasonable and necessary? So if this is something that's new to you, if you haven't been in this space for a little while, it's important to understand this reasonable and necessary criteria. In order for a support to be considered reasonable and necessary, it must relate to the participant's disability. Now, often when people come to us as exercise physiologists, they are probably coming with a multitude of different conditions. What we should only be focusing on is their primary disability. What is the reason that they are on the NDIS? Because the supports and the justification that we give should only be related to the participant's primary disability and not to the rest of the conditions that they might have that are not associated with their disability. So it must be related. It must be related to their disability. For example, somebody comes in with schizophrenia and they have their primary diagnosis, their reason for being on the NDIS is schizophrenia. They might also have diabetes. In our reports, we do not talk about diabetes because that is not related to the participant's disability. The only thing that is related, the only thing that our report should be talking to is schizophrenia and the impact that schizophrenia and exercise can have as they work together to improve the quality of health and quality of life of a person that's got that diagnosis. So our reports and our communication is just related to the participant's disability. It should not include day-to-day living costs related to disability support, such as groceries. More often than not, gym memberships are not funded through the NDIS. They are an everyday expense that any kind of Australian would need to fork out the money for. I have a gym membership. I choose to pay for that. The NDIS generally does not fund gym memberships because it's not seen as a day-to-day living cost. It should represent value for money. It should be likely to be effective for work, most likely to be effective and work for the participant. So it should be effective. What we are recommending should be effective. And it should take into account the support given to participants by other government services, family, carers, networks, and a community. An example here would be understanding the difference between what the NDIS funds and what Medicare can fund. So again, using that example before, supports related to the individual with schizophrenia related to schizophrenia are the NDIS. The supports related to the comorbidities of that person with schizophrenia, for example, diabetes, Medicare, and community health services, right? There needs to be a distinction that we are just speaking to the primary diagnosis and there are other supports available for other comorbid conditions that are not related to that specific condition. So this is the framework that we need to be using to understand what is reasonable and necessary, i.e. what the NDIS is actually going to fund. So as an exercise physiologist, we obviously have some different roles that we can be playing for people. We are doing assessments and we're doing reporting. We're creating individualized planning for people. Now, there'll be some people that come to us with limited funding, potentially 3 to 5 hours of funding. So it would be impractical for us to try and, we want to be using that time to create a really good, effective program and teaching that to the participant as best we can so that they are able to take that program away. We should be doing planning. We are doing direct intervention, like we are working one-to-one. We are providing education and training resources. We are monitoring and progress tracking. We are collaborating with the other allied health and disability support networks that this person might have so that we can create a more supportive and collaborative approach for this participant. We're potentially working with their support coordinator or with their parent or their guardian to understand what kind of a cadence they would like to come in and engage with our services in. And then we also have compliance. So, irrespective of whether you are an NDIS provider or not, you have obligations when you're working with an NDIS participant to make sure that we are delivering services in line with best practice and in line with the safeguards. So just because you're not a provider, just because you're not a registered provider doesn't mean that you don't have to worry about these things. You absolutely do. So these are the common goals. Now there's lots of individual variants here, but these are kind of the more broader goals that clients or participants are referred to exercise physiologists for: improving health and well-being, increasing social participation, improving capacity, improving mobility, and more independence. So when we're looking at this reasonable and necessary criteria, we need to consider that a participant's personal goals, their health conditions, and their life situation. We need to understand how we are going to be fitting in with all of the supports that this person currently has. We should assess the potential benefits of the proposed intervention, including the potential improvements in physical health, functional ability, and their quality of life. And then evaluate if the intervention is value for money. So this involves considering the cost of the intervention against potential short-term and long-term benefits. One of the questions we get at Rebound Academy commonly is about the pacing of interventions. The question is generally around, somebody has a certain amount of funding. Is it better to use all of that funding at the beginning of the plan and then potentially leave a gap where that person is receiving no therapeutic intervention? Or is it better to spin that funding out over the course of 12 months, which might mean greater time periods in between the sessions that we're doing, but there's less likely to be this big gap in accessing therapeutic supports. This is a conversation that we have with the participants to understand what it is that they want, how they would like our service to be delivered to them, and at the same time, providing an evidence-based approach about what that might look like based on a condition that we're being referred for. So it should be collaborative, this evaluation, because in different scenarios, there might be potential benefits to leaning more towards one way or another there. So that is an individual conversation that we would have with a participant. So now kind of gets to the more important part of this section, and it's about justifying why exercise physiology supports should be and do tick the reasonable and necessary criteria for the NDIS. The first one here is value for money. So our supports should be value for money. Now, the example here is from Deloitte Access Economics. This was a report that was done in 2016 by Deloitte, looking at the cost benefit of exercise physiology in Australia. And the results here state that on average, it's estimated that for every $1 a consumer spends engaging in the services of an accredited exercise physiologist could receive benefits of $10.50 in terms of improved wellbeing, improved productivity, and reduced out-of-pocket health system expense. Right now, this itself is a terrific example of value for money. So if the NDIS invests $1 in exercise physiology services, the return to them would be $10.50. Great example of great example of showing value for money. Now, the context here is that there are other studies out there, and it's worthwhile having a look at some research and going more at a diagnosis level on this, because there are other great researchers that kind of speak more to individual diagnoses and value for money, which we can start to include them as well. But as in advocating for the role of exercise physiology at the start, this is a terrific place to be starting this conversation about, is exercise physiology value for money, and should a informal support or a support worker or a physio or anybody else be delivering exercise services to a client with a disability? No, absolutely not. This is the this is the starting point for a conversation about value for money when it comes to exercise physiology on the NDIS. We need to lean hard onto this because it's a great place to then go, well, exercise physiology as a whole is up here. And then as we transition down into the individual diagnosis, we can get a little bit more specific for that individual. So value for money, great place to start. Should be effective. If we are justifying, or if we are advocating for exercise physiology to be included in somebody's plan, it's got to be effective. We should be using evidence-based research and approach. So we should be justifying the inclusion of exercise physiology with research about the effectiveness of it for the condition that they have been referred for. Remember, their primary diagnosis, evidence-based. We should be including a biopsychosocial approach to that, which is understanding that their diagnosis is probably complicated. Like the reality is that people on the NDIS have a permanent and a significant disability. So we need to understand that this is probably a fairly significant impact in the life of somebody on the NDIS, and that it is not just, we should be looking at it through the lens of a biopsychosocial approach, because we know that evidence is kind of taking us that way now. And then finally, we have a scope of practice. Like we should be leaning into that scope of practice to justify the supports, justify the frequency, justify the duration, justify the actual provision of exercise physiology for people within the scope of practice. And then again, kind of leaning back into the research that we have available for us about why exercise physiology is so important for people with a disability. So this way, we are justifying why our support is effective for people. Participation. So you might have heard this saying, you might have heard this phrase, like social and economic participation. This is a way for us to be able to show, if somebody engages in exercise, that there are other ways, there are other abilities for that intervention to impact the life of the individual. Now, I've got a couple of examples here about what that might look like. So social participation for somebody with a disability might look like engaging in group classes, where they are able to engage with other people with a similar lived experience to themselves and be able to build relationships and friendships with those people, or to practice their social skills in an environment that is safe and non-discriminatory, right? We're not judging people. So we can get greater social participation from people as they build relationships with other people in group exercise class. Exercise here is kind of the conduit to helping that happen. Now, if somebody is able to come in and engage in exercise, they get a little bit more confidence, they feel a little bit more self-assured. Perhaps that then leads to them engaging in other activities within the community, support groups, social groups, things like that can lead to more interaction with other people and create more meaning for people in their lives. This is absolutely something that we should be talking about in our reports, because it does build on a healthy routine when it comes to exercise. And improve cognitive function, right? There is a plethora of research talking about the benefits to mood, to well-being, to sleep, to regulation from a healthy routine with exercise. So improved cognitive function is a result of engaging in exercise frequently and building a healthy routine. Economic participation, potentially when people are coming in, if we have a fairly low baseline, that we are working on their capacity. We're not necessarily trying to change their diagnosis, we are just improving their capacity within that diagnosis. That might help them to build more routine, it might help them to build more resilience, it might help them to be able to open up their either voluntary or paid job opportunities in the future because they're more physically or cognitively capable of dealing with the demands of that job. So social and economic participation is very important, and it should be something that is discussed during our reporting. The next one here is risk of no support. So what would happen if somebody weren't given funding for exercise physiology? Well, we know that there are some significant side effects of medications that can influence people's their hormonal regulation, their weight, their cognition. So if somebody's not given support, there can be impacts here that might lead to them being socially isolated because they're not engaging in group support or mixing with their peers. That can lead to reduced social networks and feelings of feelings of social isolation. We can see increased symptoms because again, like we're not getting the benefits of regular exercise. The condition is the cognition is worsening because they're not exercising. And then we see this physical deconditioning and atrophy because their muscles and their body is not going to be exposed to this. So this section here, we're kind of painting quite a negative picture about what would happen if somebody was not to access exercise physiology sports in their next plan. It is okay for this section to be a bit direct. It might not feel particularly nice when we are kind of writing these things down, because we like to talk about the positives all the time. That's kind of in our nature. But we need to be explaining really, like, physiologically, what is going to happen if somebody's not able to access these supports, so that planner sitting there can go, oh, wow, like I didn't recognize or realize that, this is a side effect of not accessing supports, that this person might actually go backwards if we're not giving these supports effectively. So risk of no support is a really important component here. Now, this one has come up a lot, where it's not appropriate for informal supports or support workers to be implementing the interventions that we are prescribing. Again, like we can go pretty strong, and we definitely go strong on this one. There are safety concerns. There is an inability to modify the prescription because that is outside the scope of anybody aside from an exercise physiologist. Like if we write up a program, you must deliver that program. You cannot change that program. Because if you do, you're working outside the scope of an informal support or an AHA or a support worker, and that leaves you liable. So we need to, and there's not a delegation framework in place for those informal supports or for support workers, because it is unlikely that they will hold the qualifications and the professional indemnity and the public liability to be able to actually do these things effectively in a safe environment with participants. So we should be pretty clear and going pretty hard that there are safety concerns. You cannot modify the prescription. We have been to uni and done however many professional development courses to get ourselves to the capacity we are able to understand the person in front of us and provide a really succinct and clear plan for this person, and then to be able to keep them engaged in that service long term. You also, if you were to transition to informal supports, there's not a capacity for supervision. Like I can't go and be there with that person and be able to troubleshoot and keep the motivation and help this person, because there's no capacity for me to do that. If somebody is moving in a way that might put them at higher risk of an injury, I'm not there. I can't look after that person. I can't provide that safe oversight for that person. So again, like going hard here that it is appropriate for EPs to be delivering this service for people with a disability and not these other people and professions, because they have their own place. Like, they don't need to be doing this. There's plenty of other things that they can do fantastically well with participants. And so to be playing to their strengths rather than going and trying to sort of do work for us. So I appreciate that was kind of a lot of information given quickly. It is something that you could probably obviously tell in my voice. I'm pretty passionate about it, something that we spend a lot of time here at Rebound Health kind of talking about. So if you do have any questions, there's my details. Please feel welcome to reach out whenever you want. For the allied health professionals out there, what I've just been through, this is your report. This is what a report looks like. It goes through these headings. It goes through a justification that is slightly different to what we've used in previous or in other schemes. But when we use these terminologies, when we use these languages, it can provide the people that are reading our reports clarity on the role that we are playing for people with a disability, and justify more strongly as to why our supports should be included. Thanks, team.